And I think people don't understand the quality and impact of an engagement. It will make or break a lot of things. It's just like when you think about when sites are engaging with a patient to convince them to join a trial. How they engage with that patient will either convince that patient to say, yes, I consent, or not. Same thing happens when you're working with people on your team. If you guys are not engaging with each other right, you two could be huge superstars. But if you're clashing heads, that team is not going to be successful, right? And as a leader, you need to listen, identify, and figure out how to make that work, right? And it's the same thing with your vendors. If you are not engaging with them properly, they don't feel like this is a partnership. I mean, what do you expect? What do you expect out of them, right? They're like, I'm going to do what I need to do because I need the money. I need this invoice paid, but I'm not going to go above and beyond. I'm not going to suggest anything more because you're not going to listen to me. And it's that relationship, that empathy in the boardroom and the meeting room that I think a lot of people have lost sight of over the years.
Today on Bluestock Talk, I welcome Dr. Denise Bronner. She began her career in the lab researching complex immunological questions before realizing she wanted to help translate science into real-world impact. The path took her from academia into pharma, consulting, venture capital, and she was driven by one central question: how do we turn passion into profit without losing either along the way? Denise, welcome to Bluestock Talk.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited for this.
I'm so excited to have you on. I met you at a conference and I was and I sat in your solution circle, or it was like a little group. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I need to get to know this woman better. She's so amazing. Like what you've accomplished in your life. And also I kind of felt like we had similar origin stories of like, we started in science and academia and then we sort of changed from there. So for the listeners, will you share a little bit about your origin story and tell us what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I am a classically trained academic researcher. I did a PhD in microbiology and immunology. I knew since the age of 14 that I wanted to get my PhD. And I just thought it was really cool that bacteria and viruses, something you can't see with the naked eye, could take you out. And I was like, that just blew my mind. So I did my PhD. And at the time, I didn't really want to become a professor. I was like, I think I kind of want to do it, but I didn't want to just stay in a lab. I wanted my impact to be bigger. I didn't want my research to stay behind paywalls. But, they don't tell you about different careers in academia, right? It's like either you become a professor or you don't. And if you don't, you're seen as a failure. You're going to the dark side. And I always tell people I love being a Sith Lord, so I don't see why I shouldn't go to the dark side. And so I decided to, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was like, let me just do an academic postdoc just to kind of get my feet wet. And that's when I learned about the world of business through a business development fellowship at UC Davis. And that, again, was something that blew my mind, that you had people who were making decisions about where capital was being deployed, what companies were going to actually take off and really, be the new asset or the new medical device. And a lot of these people didn't have a medical background. They didn't have a scientific background. And I'm like, how are you investing in things if you don't know the science? So I wanted to marry these two realms together and, had to prove that I could work in the corporate world. So I did consulting, which is always the first step for most academics. And then I worked at J&J for a few years, where I worked within their clinical trial operations side. And then I had that same feeling I did in grad school. I want my impact to be more than just one company. So I branched off and started my own consulting agency, which has been in the business since 2024. And since then, I have been on boards of nonprofit and for-profit startups and organizations. I have, worked with 16 or 17 different clients so far, from Fortune 500 companies to, pre-seed to Series A type startups. And I've also worked with academic institutions like Duke and Charles R. Drew to kind of help push the next scientific or innovative idea through to commercialization. So it's been a pretty cool little run that I've been through.
It's a very cool run. And I love, one of your taglines, I think it's in LinkedIn, is like bringing empathy to boardrooms. And I feel that is often missed, or, we talk to these C-suite folks, or, they're in it for, what it's a business, right? But oftentimes they'll forget that critical piece of empathy. And so I think that's what you're doing at Empact, right? I love the name, because it's EMPAC, or Empactful Ventures. So talk a little bit about that and like, what's your mission with that company?
Yeah, and you got it right. I mean, I wanted to take empathy and impact and put them together because, like you said, a lot of times I've realized that if you have more of a passion driven or mission driven type of company, the first things most people think of is that it's just not going to make money. It's nice to have your cute little business, but you're not really going to be changing anything. And I think that that's just a disservice to all the founders who have these types of companies. And I wanted to prove a point that you can have passion and profits and it can be together. So, and I think the other thing too is with leadership, what I've noticed is as people go up the ranks, that level of empathy, like you said, decreases because they have to have this executive presence. And I again feel as though you're missing the point of why you even started this company in the first place is you were trying to solve an issue to help alleviate a person's problem, condition, whatever the case may be. So my mission is really to empower founders who are in this space of health tech to say that you started off because you wanted to solve a problem, and that is your mission, but you can still make money. But you have to learn how to tie all of these things back to business. So business outcomes, business imperatives. And so I work with founders on how to do that properly without selling their soul or deviating too much from their core.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you and I spoke about previously was how do you take away those silos? So what are some, like, not to, I want people to reach out to you and actually hire you to do this, but like, what are some, if you can give us a little snapshot into what are some of those things that people can do?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is what I've noticed for some, when you think about anyone who's more mission driven, is that they're like, if we start talking in this type of language, doesn't that mean that we're kind of selling out? And I'm like, no, because you are finally tying value to what you're doing. It's not a moral objective anymore. So you have to help people kind of see that differently and also remind them that if you are not able to get the proper cash flow, whether it's through investments or through your contracts, what happens when you disappear? Is there anybody else who's in the ecosystem that can fill in the gap that you leave? If not, you need to find a way to adapt. You need to find a way to talk the language to get that capital in so you can continue to serve the community that you want. So when we talk about these silos, a lot of times it can be internal to the person of helping them to kind of, not separate these things, but see how they are, kind of fused together. But then even across different departments, how do you help people to see what each function needs to do? Because a lot of times people will say that commercial and marketing are separate. They can be, but they really should be working together. Or if you're thinking about product, right, and data, those two need to feed into each other. So how do you help teams kind of see who feeds into who without saying that one has more value over the other? Because at some point in time, you're going to be feeding into each other, but you have to understand how you're feeding into each other and when. And so I help teams kind of see that piece a little bit better to help them to understand that you need them just as much as, they need you.
Yeah.
And that's the way that I kind of help kind of remove some of those barriers that are there when you think about different departments or even internally to a person's mind.
It's almost like you're a business therapist. Maybe there's
Pretty
some.
much. Pretty much.
Yeah.
I will say, and it's interesting too, because I've had people who even come to me for personal career pivots. And a lot of times I've told people, I'm like, you don't really need direction. What you need is someone to affirm what you're thinking, right? To give you the push for what you're trying to go for. Because I've had people say, well, I don't know what I want to do. And when you start to probe a little bit more, they finally land on where they want. And I'm like, so if you know what you want, why aren't you doing it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of times it's because they're in their own way, so they need a shove. And I always tell people, I'm the one that helps you to shove you into the right direction. Because a lot of times people know what they need to do for their business or for their career. They're just afraid to do it. So yeah, I like the idea of considering myself to be an empathetic therapist, but I'm not, you know, um, what's the word? I haven't been trained,
Yeah.
so I wouldn't want to throw that out there too much, but I like the idea of saying I'm helping people to see themselves better and their business better.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of folks will reach out, especially for career advice. I get some of those calls
Yeah.
too sometimes. And
Yeah.
some folks, I'm like, do you just want me to listen? And I guess this is like the therapy. Do you want me to listen or do you want me to talk and give you my opinion on this?
That's a great question. I don't think people really understand that, even when you think about relationships, right? Of when a person's sitting there and talking, it's like, ask the question, do you want solutions or you want me to just listen?
Yeah.
And a lot of times that will help you, because if you start solutioning, the person's like, I already thought about 15 different ways to solve this.
Right.
I don't need that. Then you're not going to have a productive conversation. So I like posing that question when people come to me to say, do you want me to listen or do you want me to help
Yeah.
solution with you?
Yeah. Love it. One of the things that you mentioned to me, and I actually get this a little bit too, on LinkedIn and a lot of the social media, because you're very active on social, which I think is important because you have something really important to share, is that people will tell you, I wish I could like your stuff. And so like there's
Yeah.
some things that you say or some things that you share that people are
Yeah.
like, oh, that so resonates with me, but if I like it or if I repost it, I might get in trouble. So
Oh,
share some of
yeah.
the ones that you've gotten that response for.
Oh, yeah. I will tell you. So there were one really calling out when I've called out industry on saying, oh, we're innovative and we care about representation, yet you've cut the budget for certain types of initiatives, or you've eliminated teams. And people are like, yeah, I've seen that happen. I see that actively happening at my organization. Or another one, when I talk about your boss and how your boss gets in the way, like you hired a team and yet you're still micromanaging them. Every final decision has to come through you. You have a head of sales, you have a chief commercial officer, you've got a head of marketing, you've got all these things, and yet you still are in the weeds with them. It's like, why did you hire them? Right? If you don't trust what their ability, then that means you didn't choose the right person. It's not that person's fault. That's you. You're the one who hired them. And so I've had people reach out to me and they're like, this is insane. Or when I talked about the whole thing with Merck splitting, I
Yeah.
had several people from Merck not only check out my profile, which was hilarious, but I also had a few people message me and say, we learned so much more from your post than what we had from our internal leadership. And I went, oh, well, this is just what I see in industry, right? But it was just interesting that people were like, that makes sense to me if that's the reason why they're breaking it off. It wasn't explained. And so I think what happens a lot of time with leadership is that they make these decisions and they don't take even just 5 to 10 minutes to explain the rationale. Now, of course, some will say, well, we don't have to. Why do we have to? But I think if you want to maintain a culture of people feeling like their voices are heard or that they're contributing to something, you have to take those 5 to 10 minutes. You have to still have that empathy there, because these are people who are contributing to your dreams. I mean, they have their own, but they're really working hard to help you achieve your goal for your business, for your outcome that you're looking for, whether it's to, continue to drive up, stock prices, to have an exit, or whatever the case may be. But I don't think people really think about that. So it's always been those hot topics of leadership issues or things that are happening in industry, and people are like, yeah, I can't talk about it, but
Yeah.
I'll get messages on the side all the time, all the time.
I know. I'm like, no worries. Slip into my DMs because I love it.
Right. And I never say names. I always look and I go,
Yeah.
yeah, you're not the only one. And they're like, really? I'm like, yep, you're not the only one. So don't feel like you're the only one out on the limb here. So
Yeah. And I think for leadership, one of the times, because I've had employees underneath me or I've managed teams, and I realized oftentimes that when I would go out of town or I would be
yeah,
like, okay, I'm really gonna, or I had a kid, and I was like,
yeah,
I'm gonna log off for a bit here. Those were the times that people really, I realized that I, I was standing in the way almost, right? Like I was like, if I can step back and let them also trust themselves and have the confidence,
yes,
it's a win-win. Like I would come back and I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys actually don't need me, but I'm happy to be back. And we all love working as a team, but
right.
it was a hard lesson because you're just like, oh, I must be important. But at the same time, I'm like, but you're right. I have hired the people that will do this job really well. Like, why else would
And I
I have?
think that proves a point that if they're able to do the day-to-day operations, that allows you to do the other things that you need to do, which is open up
Yes.
new avenues for them, to think about where you can take the business next or the team next. You know, things that really take a lot of time to think through, strategy building, where you're not having to worry about the operational side because you have the team that's taking care of it. And I think that's when you start to really see the creativity come in, right? Because now you're like, hey, I have these new ideas. What really resonates? And if you know your team, you'll know who you could put off these new projects, these new pilots to see and really let them shine because you've been listening to them in their one-on-ones with you. And so that's the other thing that I don't think a lot of leaders do properly is really listen to their team. Because if you have someone who is really good at their job and you're pushing them for a higher position, do they even want that position? Some people do not want a higher level of responsibility, right? Or if you're moving them into a new area, like if you're moving a person from operations to sales or vice versa, is that what that person really wants to do, right? Sometimes people do want to try new things, figure out a way to let them try it so they can see if it works for them. Let them shadow, and do those type of things. But you've got to listen to what people are telling you, what they want and don't want. And a lot of times I see leadership just not listening at all, at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always think about FDA because that's my second world, right?
Yeah,
and I see a lot of the hiring that they're doing and the not promoting people who are remote, and also they used to allow folks to move around within FDA. So you could move to a different center, you could move to a different office. And, so folks in devices could learn about the drug world, and folks in biologics could come over into the policy world. And that has been, it's not as big of a focus now because they're like, we have to hire new people. So everyone stay put so that we can bring in external people. So I feel like when we look at leadership, it's not just companies necessarily. I mean, FDA is also an organization, but we see this systemically happening right now. And I wish they could hire you.
You know what's interesting about it? When you think about bringing in people who are external to a team, it's kind of scary because, and then, I mean, even when I'm doing this as an independent consultant, I've told many of my founders how you communicate why you're bringing in external people will really set the tone with how they engage with that consultant and even as the team continues to work. Because if you're bringing in someone, you need to make sure you're positioning it as there's this additional support, right? That you're not saying that, hey, you guys are screwing up so bad that I had to bring somebody in, right? Because it sets a different tone. And I said for the founders that do that properly, I'm able to really integrate into the teams. And for others, you can tell certain people are just like, nope, I don't need it. And it's like because you didn't position it right. And I think when you think about companies that are hiring externally, even to a team, and I had this happen many of times where I was on a team, you had some really strong people, and yet they still went outside of the team to hire someone or even outside the company. And when you look at who they brought in, you're like, their experience doesn't align. And they were not introduced to the team in the right way. So the team is very resistant. They're like your out group, as they put for these different types of biases, right? Your out group. And I think that really can make or break a lot of teams. So you have to think about how are you communicating this? And a lot of times this whole problem that you have can be solved in a 5 to 10 minute conversation, but people again, don't want to do that.
Do you help with that transition, or do you help like, hey, you're about to bring me into this group, here's some ways that I want you to introduce me? It's like introducing a new cat into your house. Or
and people understand that with animals.
Right,
I'm like, if you think about it with animals, we are just a step up. So let's think about that, right? Like they do it through, cries and meows and barks. We're doing it through words. And you think people would know that, but no. So I've had it where I've tried to at least for the kickoff, whether it is, hey, let's make sure we say this part properly, or if I'm meeting with team without leadership, I always ask the question, how did they communicate me coming in with you guys? Because I want to hear from them what was told. And it's really nice because when leadership isn't on the call, they're very honest about it. Right now, the first couple are like, they look to left or right. Everybody knows that look on Zoom. And there's always one person who pipes up. And then you pay attention to how everybody else is responding. And so I've been able to kind of smooth things out that way. But it's been very interesting seeing how I get introduced to different companies. Some have done a really great job, and others I'm like, let me explain. Let me give you a little bit of.
Why I'm here. Yeah.
Let me tell you why. And so a lot of times I'm like, look, just use me as an additional resource. I'm not here to dictate to you. I'm here as a support system for you. That has helped to smooth things over very, very nicely with people. So
yeah. I even think of, when we bring baby's home. They tell you, like, give the blanket that the baby's been. So maybe you just should send a blanket that you've been wearing to.
Me too, right? Or like send like a Loom video of saying, hi, hey, everybody.
Oh, I like that idea. It's
I
like my
can't send
introduction.
you, right. Hello. Hi. Let me
Dr.
just tell
Bronner.
you, right, right. Call me Denise. No need to be formal. You know, it's like,
Oh my
let's just start this
gosh.
easy.
I feel like we could have a whole separate series on this of
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
introducing your consults to your team. Yeah. So
Yeah. And sometimes you don't even introduce them. They're like, well, where did you get this information from? You're like, oh, well, I have an external advisor. Cool.
cool.
Can we meet with this advisor? And so it's just been very interesting, you know?
Yeah.
So,
I get asked this question a lot, so I'm going to ask it of you. How have you felt that your academic background, because I feel like, there are a lot of folks that have their PhD and they're moving into industry. How have the things that you learned in your academic life translated and really benefited where you are now and what you're doing now?
man, I think the biggest one is really being able to deal with criticism. So, when you do any type of academic degree, whether it's your master's or your PhD, you are constantly going up against the wall defending your thesis, right?
Yes.
And you have an entire team of your, that looks at your thesis, your aims, your committee, and they're looking at it going, well, does this make sense? Aim one is dependent upon aim two. That's not right. You can't do that. And you have to defend why you're doing certain types of experiments. And I think when you go into industry and you are putting forth a new strategy or a new idea or a new dashboard or whatever the case may be, you just feel so much more comfortable with the criticism. Sometimes you laugh at it because you're like, this is mild compared to what I got in grad school. I think the other thing too is when you think about, how to, when you really look at data and being comfortable with data, I feel like that has also been a big thing for me. It's knowing how to look at data and say, what is the story that's here, right? Or being able to really break down something that's complex and saying, how do we piece this back together? Grad school did a really great job with that, and being able to be comfortable with, having failures, with having to have challenges. Like a lot of those things that are, kind of considered soft skills you learn in grad school. And depending on what you go into, you can lean back on your scientific knowledge, but I think it's those other pieces of what you suffered through grad school really made you much stronger. And I've had a few people tell me when we've had challenging situations, they've never seen my porcelain crack. And I'm like, no, because it's already been cracked and put back together when I was in grad school. So what you're seeing is this kind of new form or new shield that's been put up. But I think that those have been some of the biggest benefits of going through grad school is knowing how to deal with the corporate personalities that are there, because it's very similar to what you see in grad school.
Yeah.
Very similar.
I do. I think it's very
Just
transferable.
less money. Just less money.
Just less money.
And
yeah.
I was like, can I go through this but get paid more? Yeah, I'll do that. I think I'll do that.
Yeah. So true. Yeah, I often will say the failure thing. I feel like you fail so often in grad school because it's either your experiment that you're like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, there must have been some sort of contamination, or there have been times when I ran the gel too long and I'm like, well, gonna start that one again.
It's gone. It's gone.
Yeah.
Just floating in the water.
Yeah, exactly.
Floating in solution. Look at it. Well, okay.
And you have to wake up the next day and be like, here we go again. We're just gonna pick up the pieces and keep moving forward. So
yeah, especially when we used to get me is when you get contaminations, like you said, especially on cell cultures, and you're like, oh, I've been doing so good. Yes. And then you see that little floating disc of fungus and you're just like, how did you get in there? I sprayed down everything. I got my gloves on. Everything is covered. How did you get in there? It's like the most frustrating thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just one of those, you have to take a deep breath and just be like, okay. Some days I would just be like, I'm going home. I'm done.
I've done that.
Yeah.
In the middle of the day. And so for me, because I also was a morning person, I would get into the lab like at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. And it was great because no one else comes in. I'm like, peace and quiet. So I used to have my music playing really loud, and people knew it was me because you would hear the music playing. Um, and I would be in there, but I would leave really early. And people are like, you're leaving and it's 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. I'm like, yeah, I've
Yeah.
been in here since 6.
Yeah.
It's time to go, you know? And like some people were evening. Like I knew a person when I was leaving in the afternoon, they were coming in and they would stay late.
Yeah.
Right. And so then you would see us flip. They would be leaving when I'm coming in. And I'm like, oh,
That was
hey.
me. Yep.
Yeah. See? And I
I
always
was the
laughed
night
at I'm like,
owl.
how I can't stay awake at night.
Yeah.
I'm like, as soon as the afternoon, it's like, no, I
Yeah.
can't do it. I can't do it.
Yeah. I was totally night shifted, I think, in grad school.
Yeah, no, I tried. There was a couple of times where I had to do it, and I was like, I don't see how people can do this every day. I can't do it. My brain was like, we should be in bed. Why are we here? I'm like, I'm trying to get this done. I'm trying to get this done. Please just stay awake.
Yeah.
So,
And even just, I mean, there would be weekends where you're like, no, I got experiments running. It's a 7-day week here because every single day I got something that I have to be in there for.
yeah, and I was one of those grad students who's like, if I can avoid coming in the weekends, I will. And so I used to time my experiments where I wouldn't have to. Oh, man. People are like, I've never seen you here on a Saturday. And I'm like, yeah, and you won't because I don't like my weekends being eaten up by research.
Yes.
Nope.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
No, that's good. You probably had better time management than I did. I feel like that also was one of the things that forced me to do is get better at, doing my to-do lists,
Yes.
my checklists.
Oh, yeah.
One more question. Actually, a couple more questions, but one that we had spoken about last week. So you've mentioned that there's sort of this power dynamic between suppliers and companies. And I've never really thought about it that way, right? That there's, it makes so much sense, but maybe unpack that a little bit for the folks listening. Yeah.
Yeah. So power dynamics, I think, is something that's big because most of the time when you think about any vendor, right, they have to come in, you have to pitch yourself, you have to show what your capabilities are. I mean, it literally is like a startup pitching to an investor. Hey, invest in me. You want to work with me. And a lot of times what we see is this dynamic where sponsors, whether they're, pharma or med tech, have the power because they're the ones with the budget. And they're dictating to you what they need, and they try to negotiate with you on cutting down startup costs and things along those lines. And it makes it feel very transactional, where it's like, hey, I need you to do one thing and one thing only. I don't need you telling me anything else. And what happens is that you're pulling them in when you need things to be rescued. And you're constantly having them play this game of, can you fix this? Can you fix this? Can you fix this? And if you're good at it, you constantly keep getting pulled into that game. And if you're bad at it the first time, you never get a call back. So it feels very transactional. And I think the other thing too is you're only keeping them to that one space. But what if they can inform other areas? So like if you think about a clinical trial and you have this vendor that you're working with that's in recruitment, they're great for getting you patients, but do they have other types of data that can inform your portfolio? Do they have insights about these patients that can inform your commercial strategy? Now you're bringing them in end to end.
Yeah.
Now it's more of a long-term relationship with them and not just for this particular trial, but maybe for that whole disease area or that whole therapeutic area. So I try to help teams see that more, that a lot of times these relationships that you're building, especially with smaller companies, can really enrich your entire, trial life cycle from end to end. But you see them doing that more with these other larger companies or larger CROs. And I'm like, but you hate the work that they do. So why didn't you do it with them? Why not give it to the smaller guy? They're cheaper, but they're also going to be better enriched with their data. So we're starting to see it a little bit more, but now with the whole thing that's been going on for the past couple of years with inconsistent cash flow and changes at the administration, it's making it a little bit uneasy, but I do see some startups that have the ability to really expand that reach beyond what they're typically being brought into. But that transactional relationship can really put a bad taste in vendors' mouths. And just like sponsors talk, so do vendors. And they'll tell other people, don't get involved with them, or don't get involved with that team at that organization because they're terrible.
Yeah.
And I've seen that being on the inside of J&J, how my organization worked very different from another. And we worked with the same vendor. And there were some vast differences in how we were engaging with them. And they were like, we like working with you more than the other team. And I was like, well, Yeah, I could see that. But that was something that you really didn't sit well with them, you know? And so you see that happening with a lot of vendors where they're kind of like, do I really need you? Because there's smaller biotech companies that I can work with. I don't need to necessarily work with you. And
Yeah.
there's other bigger pharma that are out there that I could work with, and I can avoid you at all costs. So it's very interesting when you start to see that shift change. But I feel like a lot of vendor sponsor relationships are very transactional in nature.
And so one of the things that you said that I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, it's people, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
transactional. And so some of the teams may not like that vendor, and especially I see it with like large companies where they're like, no, this group uses this vendor and this group uses this one over here. And, yes, we have to have them both on our supplier list, but it seems to work fine. And I realize it comes down to the people, right? Of like,
It does.
who's actually interacting? What are the personalities there? And I guess we're coming full circle because that also comes back to the leadership of that group.
It does. And I think people don't understand the quality and impact of an engagement. It will make or break a lot of things. It's just like when you think about when sites are engaging with a patient to convince them to join a trial. How they engage with that patient will either convince that patient to say, yes, I consent or not. Same thing happens when you're working with people on your team. If you guys are not engaging with each other, right, you two could be huge superstars. But if you're clashing heads, that team is not going to be successful, right? And as a leader, you need to listen, identify, and figure out how to make that work, right? And it's the same thing with your vendors. If you are not engaging with them properly, they don't feel like this is a partnership. I mean, what do you expect? What do you expect out of them, right? They're like, I'm going to do what I need to do because I need the money. I need this invoice paid, but I'm not going to go above and beyond. I'm not going to suggest anything more because you're not going to listen to me. And it's that relationship, that empathy in the boardroom, in the meeting room that I think a lot of people have lost sight of over the years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that you've coined yourself as somebody who has a marketer's ear. And I feel like this is so perfect because when I think about sales and I think about trying to close a deal and the
Yeah.
really, really good BD, like the business development people that I've worked with, and I'm like, you are phenomenal, are
Yeah.
the ones who are not trying to close the deal at all costs. They are the ones that are trying to find the best vendor for somebody that, sometimes it's like, hey, actually, I might not be the right person for you. This other company should be also talk to them, like,
Yes.
I'm glad you're talking to me, but also maybe reach out to these one or two other companies because they might
Yeah.
be a better fit. And I feel like
Yeah.
that ends up getting more return sales. I don't know if it must be a
Yeah.
tactic as well, but I don't know much
Yeah.
about BD, but I'm like, the ones that I really admire are the
Yeah.
ones that don't feel like they're trying to sell you a used car.
Yeah. That's the thing. It's like knowing what you can actually do. Like, what are your true capabilities?
Yes.
Don't oversell it. And you need to lead with metrics that speak the language of your potential client, not just what you think is relevant. What do they actually care about,
Right.
right? Like, if they really care about recruitment, you should be talking about recruitment metrics. If they're really caring about cost savings or timelines, you should be talking in that regard, right? Don't bring in this moral stuff, right? Don't spend too
Yeah.
much time talking about, oh, we know it's a problem. Everybody knows it's a problem.
Yeah.
Why do you think they're having this meeting?
Right.
Tell them, how do you solve, what is the impact, and what can you do? If you can answer that, you should be able to do that in 10 to 15 minutes, and that's it. And I think that's the part where people lose sight. It's like you said, they're trying to sell, sell, sell. And it's like, but are you overselling and you don't have what it is to actually execute on that, right? Or
Yeah.
even as a person who's doing the capabilities review at a company, you should be looking at this and going, I like that they can do this piece, but they can't do these other things. So is there a way for me to parse out the budget where I can bring them in and maybe one or two other vendors to help me with this? But I need all of them to work together.
Right.
Because now what you're doing is introducing people who in the future, like you said, may say, can we partner on future projects together? So it's not just me sending an RFP, a proposal, the two of us together, because we're answering these two things that seem to be a big issue for clients.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially I have my preferred vendors for historically I've been in regulatory, but
Yeah.
for reimbursement,
Yeah.
for various spokes of the wheel. I've talked about this previously on the podcast because I'm like,
Yeah.
there's so many different, and I'm like, I'm not good at those things, or I'm not skilled at those things. So
Yeah.
don't hire me for that because that's not something I'm offering. But here are the teams that I work well with, but don't feel beholden to like hire them. It's just, I'm going to give you some recommendations and you need to vet
Right.
them. Yeah.
Right.
So interesting. Okay. So my final question that everyone gets asked on this
Yes.
podcast, and hope I've prepared you. What is a med tech that has either improved your quality of life or the quality
Yeah.
of life of someone you love?
Yeah. I would say, and it's kind of it's more on the pharma side of things, 'cause that's the space that I'm in. But what I thought was very interesting is the one therapeutic Darzalex. So Darzalex is an immunotherapy for multiple myeloma. And multiple myeloma is a blood cancer that typically, presents itself with, higher fatigue, higher amounts of calcium in a person's blood. And it's just, you have these plasma cells that are overproducing, certain types of protein that will deposit itself into various areas of the body. And a lot of times people will end up having organ, damage done to kidneys, bladder, heart, you name it. And for the longest time, the life expectancy for someone with multiple myeloma was very, very small. It was like less than 5 years. And so they would have to put them on chemo, which, as you know, is a widespread, not a very targeted approach. And so you had companies that were looking to find ways to be more targeted in their approach. So when Darzalex was first put onto the market, it was very much through an infusion, like you would see with most other chemotherapies. But it was like these large bags. But this would take hours for a person to go through. And so they were thinking, is there a way to change the formulation so that the person wouldn't have to sit there for that long? And that change in formulation allowed them to do a simple 2-minute injection
What?
into the stomach.
That's
So you
amazing.
go from these large bags to just a simple single syringe injection. And that was a groundbreaking, game-changing type of therapy because when you think about people who may have had, impacts to their heart and their heart function is compromised, like if they're having congestive heart failure, having large amounts of fluid put onto a person is horrible because the heart cannot flush it through the body properly. So the person may get some swelling. This new type of injection doesn't have that type of problem. And so it worked out really nicely for my dad, who has multiple myeloma but congestive heart failure. We were able to have him on that, and it eliminated that problem of having to put his heart through more work. And he finished his course with it and ended up being in remission now for 2.5, almost 3 years now.
Amazing.
So
Thank you for
it's
sharing
been
that.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I gotta say, when I look at things like that,
Yeah.
this is where chemistry was never a strong suit for me. Like I was great in the lab, but don't ask me about formulas. Like I was bad at it. But um, it's just one of those things where you think about advancements. It doesn't necessarily need to be a new thing. It's like, how can we adapt and evolve something that's already there? And you think about other type of med devices, like women who have to go in to get a pap smear. Going in for that is terrible. Now you have these companies that have come up with in-home testing.
Right.
So now you can do your own and not have to worry about being dismissed or having your pain overlooked because of how painful it can be. So I look at things like that of how are we providing more ease for people? Those are the ones that get me really excited. I don't care about AI. It's like, are we helping people have the ability to remain in control, to still have their agency over their health, and to feel, you know, more of like they're being seen and heard, and they're not having to worry about their comfort level being impacted. That's the part, especially in these very difficult situations with a condition or disease. Like that's a very crippling, and vulnerable place to be in sometimes. And if you can help someone get through that easier, then
Yeah.
that to me is a great invention.
Yeah. And I think that was how we first met at that
Yeah.
conference, at the Hearst
Yeah.
conference, sitting around talking about what are the technologies, what are the things that we can just improve people's quality of life, and that they're
Yeah.
heard, that they're not
Yeah.
dismissed, and that there's just more availability and accessibility. So yeah, love it. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for joining me today. This has been an absolute treat, and keep doing what you're doing because you're changing the world. And I appreciate that.
Listen, I do it one day at a time, and I've had a lot of fun doing this. So I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. This was a good interview.
Thank you. Thanks, Denise. I'll talk to you again
Yeah.
soon.
Bye.
Bye.